The city was a ruin, a ghost of its former self. Skyscrapers lay in skeletal ruins, their twisted metal frames barely standing against the ravages of time. Once, these streets had been alive with the pulse of progress, but now they were just a battleground. Jason Riggs moved through the crumbling landscape, silent as a shadow, a predator in a world of scavengers. He had been tracking his target for days, an intergalactic smuggler who thought Earth was an easy hiding place. They always did. Earth was the last frontier, or relic of a forgotten past. To the galaxy's elite bounty hunters, it was a joke. But they didn't know Earth like he did. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying the scent of burnt debris and decay. Jason's boots barely made a sound on the cracked pavement as he crouched low, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He could feel it, the faint tremor of footsteps in the distance, the telltale signs of someone trying to blend in. He'd seen this before. The smuggler's crew wasn't far behind. 4 of them, armed to the teeth, all underestimating the terrain, all underestimating him. Jason knew that as soon as they entered his domain, the hunt would be over. The only question left was how long it would take before they realized they were the prey. The faint clatter of boots echoed off the walls of a nearby building. Jason's heart rate didn't rise. It never did. He was calm, focused, a machine honed by years of survival. The bounty hunters would expect a confrontation, but not like this. He checked his pulse weapon, the sleek, compact piece of technology humming with energy. It was quiet, efficient. Just like him. A voice cracked through the comms in his earpiece, smooth and dispassionate, the voice of his informant, a former criminal who owed Jason a favor. "They're close, Riggs. I've got a lock on them. They'll be passing through the old tram station in 2 minutes." Jason's lips twitched into the faintest smile. The trap was set. He didn't reply, focusing instead on the noise growing louder. The bounty hunters were nearing the tram station, their steps syncopated, unaware of the danger that lay ahead. He had studied their movements for hours, anticipating their every misstep. They thought they were here for an easy score. Jason stood up, his movements fluid, and stepped into the alleyway that led to the abandoned tram station. The cracked windows and rusted rail tracks had seen better days, but it was perfect. The perfect kill zone. From the corner of his eye, he spotted a figure, a blur of movement in the dim light. A bounty hunter had broken away from the group, headed toward a back exit. Jason was already 2 steps ahead. He moved swiftly, a shadow in pursuit of a shadow. The bounty hunter heard him too late. A sharp thunk echoed through the alley, followed by the soft thud of the body hitting the ground. Jason was already gone before the man hit the pavement, not waiting to confirm his kill. That was the thing about him, Jason was always on the move, always 1 step ahead. The remaining 3 bounty hunters were closing in on the station. Jason could hear them clearly now, their voices tinged with impatience. "You think he's really here?" One of them, a woman, spoke, her tone filled with frustration. The second, a bulky figure, scoffed. "Of course he's here. This is where the tracker led us." Jason's eyes narrowed as he crouched low, slipping into a shadowed corner. They were getting close. His mind moved like a predator's, calculating. The first 2 would pass by him without even realizing it, not until it was too late. The third, however, was more cautious. He had been the most observant of the group. Jason's hand rested on the pulse weapon. He was ready. The trap would be sprung in seconds. From his hiding spot, Jason watched as the 3 hunters entered the tram station, their eyes scanning the surroundings. The woman looked up, instinctively sensing something wasn't right, but Jason was already on them. He shot first. A flash of blue light erupted from his weapon, striking the man in front square in the chest. His body jerked back, then crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the floor. The woman shouted, reaching for her own weapon, but Jason was faster. He darted out from his hiding spot, moving in one fluid motion, and knocked her gun from her hand before she could fire. He twisted her arm, locking it in place, and shoved her into the nearest pillar. She gasped, struggling against his grip, but it was no use. "You're not getting out of this alive," Jason whispered, his voice cold and lethal. The last hunter, the one who had been on edge, turned in time to see his companions fall. His eyes widened in disbelief as Jason closed the distance between them in seconds. "You're the boogeyman," the man said, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. Jason didn't respond. He didn't need to. The final bounty hunter was dead before he had a chance to raise his weapon. Jason stood over the fallen bodies, breathing evenly, his gaze sharp as he surveyed the carnage. His informant's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Riggs, they're all down, huh? Nice work. But this is just the beginning." Jason's lips curled slightly into something that wasn't quite a smile. "They thought they were hunting me. But they didn't realize, they were already dead the moment they set foot on this planet." As the faint sounds of approaching ships filled the air, Jason turned and disappeared into the shadows, blending into the night as the wind howled around him. Earth's criminals would soon learn that the boogeyman wasn't just a myth. He was the nightmare that would haunt their every step. And Zara 7's crew? They were next. The cold wind bit at Marcus' exposed face as he crouched behind the wreckage of an old transport vehicle. His suit's cloaking tech hummed softly, keeping him hidden in the shadows. The transport hub he just sabotaged was now in chaos. He could hear the distant shouts of Zreth soldiers, their patrols becoming more frantic as they realized something had gone horribly wrong. Their disarray worked in his favor. His wrist comm buzzed again. Elise's voice crackled through the static, sharper this time, tinged with worry. "Marcus, do you copy?" "I hear you," he whispered, glancing around to make sure no one had spotted him. "Hub's down. You've got 10 minutes before they lock the place down. We're tracking their movements. But you're not out yet. You need to get to the secondary evac point now. It's your only chance." "Understood," he replied curtly. He had already mapped out his escape route. There was only one way off this godforsaken rock, the old mining shaft, which would take him deep underground, past the Zreth patrols. But that wasn't going to be easy. The Zreth were quick to respond, and he knew their tech better than they realized. They would be scanning for any irregularities, any hint of interference. He couldn't afford to let his guard down for a second. Marcus pulled his cloak tighter and slipped into the shadows, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years on the run. His mind raced, running through each step, each contingency. He had trained for this. Escaping behind enemy lines was something he'd mastered years ago, but now, with the Zreth knowing exactly what to look for, it was a game of inches. The underground shaft entrance was close, but the Zreth had fortified the area. Patrols moved in clusters now, their movements deliberate and synchronized. It was a new strategy, probably orchestrated by their commander. Marcus cursed under his breath. He couldn't afford to engage them. Not yet. If he started shooting now, they would overwhelm him. He needed an edge. Something to level the playing field. Minutes passed. He knew the route was clear for the moment, but time was running out. He sprinted across the field, keeping low, diving into the shadows of another ruined structure. The Zreth patrol was just 100 meters away now, closing in fast. "Marcus, you've got 2 Zreth scouts heading your way," Elise warned, her voice urgent. "We can't cover you much longer." Marcus glanced up, pinpointing their position. 2 Zreth, separated by a few meters, walking in perfect formation, weapons slung lazily over their shoulders. Easy targets. With a swift motion, he activated the small EMP charge on his belt. It sent a pulse through the nearby electronics, disrupting their scanners. The scouts' heads snapped up, confused by the sudden interference. Before they could react, Marcus was on them. In one smooth motion, he emerged from the shadows, his plasma rifle aimed and firing. The first Zreth fell without a sound, his chest exploding in a burst of energy. The second Zreth turned in time to see the flash of Marcus' weapon, but he was too slow. A shot to the leg, followed by a swift follow-up to the head, and the second soldier dropped. Marcus didn't waste time. He stripped both bodies of their weapons and quickly scanned the area for any more threats. Satisfied, he dragged the corpses into the shadows, hiding them from view. The last thing he needed was more of them coming to investigate. He couldn't afford any delays. He turned and sprinted toward the mining shaft. The entrance was a narrow, barely visible slit in the earth, hidden beneath a pile of debris. As he neared it, his comm buzzed again. "You're clear for now," Ellie said. "But Zarek's reinforcements are close. You need to move. The evac point's not far, but you're on your own from here." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The weight of what lay ahead settled in his chest. The Zreth weren't just going to let him slip away. They knew who he was. They'd be hunting him down with everything they had. He reached the shaft entrance and quickly set to work. His fingers moved with practiced ease, activating the old, rusted mechanism that would open the door. It creaked and groaned, the sound echoing in the dead silence of the surrounding wasteland. The door slid open just wide enough for him to slip inside. He didn't hesitate. He couldn't. Once inside, the air was thick with the smell of earth and damp stone. The shaft was narrow, just wide enough for a single person to squeeze through. The dim light of his suit illuminated the rough-hewn walls as he made his way deeper into the bowels of the mine. His steps echoed in the hollow space, too loud for his liking. But there was no turning back now. The deeper he went, the colder it became. The temperature dropped with every meter, but Marcus didn't notice. His body was running on autopilot. Each step, each movement, was automatic. His mind was elsewhere, on the Zreth, on the inevitable fight ahead. They'd already tracked him this far. It was only a matter of time before they found his trail. His wrist comm beeped once more. "Marcus, they've locked the surface down. You've got no way out above ground. Your only option is the secondary tunnel system. It's mapped, but it's old. Be careful." "I'll make it," Marcus muttered, more to himself than to Elise. The tunnel system was a relic from the colony's early days, long forgotten by the current inhabitants. The Zreth hadn't bothered to investigate it thoroughly, but Marcus knew better than to take it for granted. Old tunnels had their own dangers. He kept moving, his pulse steady, his mind sharp. The sounds of the Zreth outside grew fainter the deeper he traveled, but the feeling of being hunted never left. It gnawed at him, made his muscles tighten with each step. A sharp, high-pitched screech echoed through the tunnel, a warning. Marcus instinctively dropped to the ground, his rifle already raised. In the low light, he could see the faint glint of something moving rapidly toward him. Something, or someone. He held his breath, waiting. Whatever it was fast. Too fast. He had no choice but to deal with it now. His fingers tightened around the rifle, his mind racing through options. Then he saw it, two sets of glowing eyes, followed by the unmistakable silhouette of a Zreth scout on the prowl. They were searching for him, sweeping the area. Their heavy boots stomped closer, and Marcus knew the moment he was spotted, his only option would be to fight. But for now, he held his breath. Silence. Just for a few more seconds. The seconds ticked by, stretched thin as Marcus lay motionless on the cold stone floor of the tunnel. The Zreth scout's footsteps were unmistakable, echoing through the narrow shaft as it advanced with slow, methodical precision. The glow of its helmet lights danced across the walls, casting an eerie, jittery glow in the otherwise pitch-black tunnel. Marcus held his breath, forcing himself to remain utterly still. His pulse hammered in his throat, but he knew better than to panic. The scout would pass him if it didn't sense him. The key was to stay undetected, just a shadow in the dark. The Zreth's footsteps stopped, too close now. Marcus could hear the soft clicking of the scout's helmet as it scanned the area. It was less than 10 meters away. Another second, and Marcus would have no choice but to act. But then, the moment stretched just a bit too long. The Zreth scout muttered something under its breath in its harsh, alien tongue. It hadn't spotted him. Not yet. He exhaled slowly, willing himself to wait. It wasn't until the scout turned and took another few steps that Marcus made his move. In one fluid motion, he rolled forward, using the cloak of his suit to his advantage, the air around him bending and warping in response. His plasma rifle was in his hand before the scout had a chance to react. A single shot was all it took. The Zreth fell forward, a smear of burnt flesh marking the impact site, the screeching hiss of its armor dying down as its life snuffed out in an instant. Marcus moved fast, dragging the body behind a nearby rock formation, out of sight. Another one down. The clock was still ticking. He paused, scanning the area ahead. The tunnel stretched out into the dark, a labyrinth of rock and rusted metal that twisted and turned in all directions. He had memorized the maps of these ancient shafts, but even so, the feeling of being underground, far from any escape route, made his skin crawl. The further he went, the more danger he was in. This tunnel system wasn't just a relic, it was a trap for those who underestimated its twists and turns. He checked his wrist comm again. "Elise, update?" The static crackled before her voice came through, tight with urgency. "Marcus, you've got Zreth scouts in the area. They're flooding the tunnels. They know you're there." "I know," he muttered, his gaze flicking to the narrow tunnel ahead. "I've got a way out, but I can't let them track me any further. I'll need to double back." "Do it," she said. "You're too deep now. They'll be on you in minutes if you don't. We'll be waiting for you at the secondary evac point. We've got one shot at this, Holt. One shot." The weight of it settled over him. If he didn't make it, all this would have been for nothing. His family's death, the blood he'd shed, the lives he'd risked, all of it would vanish in a single failed escape. Marcus gritted his teeth and began moving again, careful, deliberate. His boots crunched softly against the loose gravel as he stepped forward, following the worn tracks that had once guided miners through this forgotten place. Every sound, every shift in the air was a potential threat. He knew the Zreth would be relentless in their search. Their methods were brutal, but efficient. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The glow from his suit provided the only light, but it was weak, flickering in the distance like a dying star. He checked the route again, trying to remember every curve, every dead end, and every possible hiding spot. He reached a fork in the tunnel. To the right, the path narrowed to a crawl space, a vent shaft designed for ventilation. The air smelled of rust, oil, and something worse, decay. To the left, the tunnel seemed to widen, a place where they could set up a perimeter if the Zreth were getting close. He needed the crawl space, the tight space that would help him slip past their patrols. Marcus made his decision. He moved left, but only for a few meters before he ducked into the small space. He crawled on his hands and knees, the air growing thinner as he moved further into the bowels of Sharon. His heart was pounding, but he stayed focused. He had been through worse, much worse. And he was going to make it out. His wrist comm beeped again. The voice that greeted him was not Elise's, but a crackling whisper that froze him in place. "This is Commander Zarek. We have you cornered, human." The voice was cold, calm, and carried an almost unsettling familiarity. Zarek. The one who had led the Zreth assault on his home. The one who had murdered his family. Marcus' grip on his plasma rifle tightened. The bastard was getting too close. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long, Holt," Zarek continued, as if savoring the words. "But your resistance is futile. You'll die down here, just like the others." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't afford to waste energy on words. Instead, he moved faster, his movements swift but controlled, every breath calculated. The tight space felt like a trap, but there was no turning back now. He emerged from the crawl space and into a large, cavernous chamber. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, and the air was heavy with the smell of sulfur and salt. A strange, unnatural glow illuminated the room. Marcus' heart raced as he realized the chamber wasn't just an old mine, it was a makeshift Zreth base, a place where they'd set up a research station. "Damn it," he muttered, slamming a fist into the stone wall. The place was crawling with Zreth soldiers. He could feel them, their presence everywhere, the hum of their advanced tech almost tangible in the air. He stepped back, his mind already working, calculating. There was no way he could take them all on, not here, not in this condition. But if he could get to the other side of the chamber, there was a maintenance shaft he could use. It led to the surface, to the old hangar where the evac ship was waiting. The plan was simple. Get to the shaft. Get out. But as his foot moved forward, a loud sound echoed through the chamber. The unmistakable thump of heavy boots. Zarek's voice cut through the tension like a blade. I'll give you one last chance, Holt. Come out now, and I'll make it quick. Resist, and you'll regret it. Marcus didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. His only option was to run. With a final, defiant glance at the encroaching Zreth, Marcus bolted forward, sprinting into the darkness. The maintenance shaft loomed ahead, a narrow, metallic tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever. Marcus didn't hesitate. His lungs burned with each labored breath, but he forced himself to keep running, his boots pounding against the steel floor. The sounds of pursuit were growing closer, heavy footsteps, the clatter of Zreth armor, the shrill buzz of their communication units. He was out of time. His wrist comm buzzed again, Elise's voice urgent and sharp. Marcus, they're almost on you. The evac point's compromised. I repeat, compromised. You need to get to the hangar now. I'm on it, he gasped, glancing behind him. The shaft was a labyrinth, twisting and narrowing as it descended deeper into the mountain, but it led to the old hangar. The only place he had left to go. A scream of rage echoed through the tunnel behind him, followed by the unmistakable growl of Commander Zarek's voice. You can't escape, Holt. You're already dead. Marcus ignored him, pushing harder. Sweat slicked his skin, his heart hammering in his chest, but his mind was sharp, focused. He had trained for moments like this, when everything depended on a single decision. One wrong move, one hesitation, and it would be over. The shaft twisted ahead, and Marcus slid to the side, ducking beneath a low-hanging metal beam. A streak of sharp pain ran through his shoulder as he misjudged the angle, but he ignored it. He couldn't afford to slow down. Ahead, the faintest light pierced through the gloom, casting a pale glow onto the walls. The hangar was just up ahead. His only way out. A loud crack echoed through the tunnel as a plasma blast seared past him, narrowly missing his head. The heat singed the air, and he could feel the pressure wave in his bones. His heart skipped a beat as he spun around, his rifle already in hand. There, at the far end of the shaft, stood Zarek. The Zreth commander's imposing figure was framed in the dim light, his eyes locked onto Marcus with cold, calculating malice. He stepped forward, the ground shaking beneath his feet, his massive form encased in reinforced combat armor. Zarek's voice came through the static of his comm, now distant but unmistakably clear. You can't hide, Holt. We've already sealed the hangar. There's no way out. Marcus' breath came in ragged gasps. His fingers tightened around his rifle. He had been counting on a quick escape, but now Zarek had him cornered. The evacuation point was locked down, and the Zreth were closing in from all sides. There was no more time for subtlety. This wasn't about escaping anymore. This was about surviving. Marcus dropped to one knee, his rifle steady in his hands as he took aim at Zarek. His mind was calm now, the storm of panic long gone. He had a choice to make. The Zreth commander was too close, too well armored to take down with a single shot. But Marcus wasn't concerned about that. A whisper of movement caught his attention as he saw the Zreth soldiers closing in from the rear, their weapons aimed directly at him. There was no more room for mistakes. With a sharp exhale, Marcus squeezed the trigger. The plasma bolt shot through the air with a thunderous crack. The blast hit Zarek's chest with a sickening thud, sending a shockwave that reverberated through the tunnel. The commander staggered back, his armor flashing in response, but the blast was too much. Zarek's breath caught in his throat as he fell, crashing to the ground in a heap of metal and flesh. But it wasn't over. Marcus knew that a single shot wouldn't be enough to finish him. Zarek was strong, resourceful, and relentless. But right now, Marcus wasn't interested in giving him a second chance. He turned and bolted for the hangar. The blast doors were ahead, just a few more meters, and Marcus could see the dim light of the hangar bay. The familiar hum of the old transport ship's engines filled the air, a promise of escape. The ship was ready, the last lifeline. But he wasn't alone. The Zreth soldiers were still pursuing him. Marcus swore under his breath as he heard the rapid footfalls of more Zreth soldiers closing in. They were too fast, too many. He wouldn't make it to the hangar in time. "Elise, open the doors," he shouted into the comm, his voice tight with desperation. The response was immediate. "They're sealed, Marcus. You have to breach the lock manually. I can't override it from here. You need to hurry." He gritted his teeth and dropped to the ground, crawling toward the hangar doors. The mechanism was old, but not so old that it couldn't be opened from the inside. There was a manual override just above the door's control panel, but it was locked tight. And if he triggered it, it would set off alarms. Zreth reinforcements would flood in, and there'd be no time to escape. But it was the only option. Marcus fought back the panic rising in his chest and focused. His hands were steady, despite the blood dripping down his arm from a graze earlier. He reached the panel and began to work. The door's locking mechanism was ancient, but it was still functional. The wires were brittle, and the system was glitching, but Marcus had hacked into enough security systems in his time to know what needed to be done. His fingers danced across the controls, the sharp scent of burnt wires filling the air as he bypassed the security protocols one by one. Every second counted. Come on," he muttered under his breath. The Zreth soldiers were close now, their voices growing louder as they neared the entrance. He could hear them shouting, the sound of their weapons powering up. The door gave a small shudder. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The override was almost complete. "Marcus, get ready." Elise's voice crackled, louder than before, tinged with urgency. "The ship's coming online. You've got 10 seconds." He pressed the final button. There was a sudden burst of light, and the door jerked open, a full foot wide. The sound of metal grinding against metal screamed through the air. Without hesitation, Marcus bolted forward, diving through the gap, his rifle raised and ready. The ship's engines roared to life as he sprinted towards the hatch. He didn't look back. Not even when the Zreth soldiers fired their weapons, not even when the ground shook beneath his feet. The hatch slammed shut just as the first plasma bolt slammed into the side of the ship, sending a tremor through the hull. He was in. "Take off, Elise," he shouted, his breath ragged, his body trembling with adrenaline. The ship shot forward, ascending rapidly as the hangar doors closed behind them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus allowed himself to relax, just a little. He leaned back in the seat, staring at the vast expanse of stars outside. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for now, Marcus had won.